After months of tough talk and warnings, now it's official. Today, the U.S. and China launched a trade war, instituting a reciprocal $34 billion worth of tariffs against the other's exports. And apparently, this is just the opening shot. President Trump, accusing China of unfair trade practices and intellectual theft, says he will up the ante every time Beijing matches new U.S. tariffs. Here's what the spokesman for China's Commerce Ministry had to say.
The U.S. measures are essentially attacking the global industrial chain and value chain. To put it simply, the United States is setting the world on fire and is also lighting itself up.
Well, for more, we're joined by economy correspondent Asher Westropp-Evans. And Asher, what kind of goods and exports are being targeted on either side of this dispute? And what does the difference between them indicate about their strategies?
Well, Kalev, we're seeing two fundamentally different strategies play out here. We're seeing the U.S. focusing on high-end goods coming in from China. We're talking computers, we're talking robots, we're talking industrial machinery, we're talking these really high-end items, high production value, high-cost items that are really the U.S. is trying to move China away from and bring back to domestic industry. The Chinese, on the other hand, are trying to maximize where they can cause pain. So they're looking more at agricultural goods. We're talking fruit and vegetables, we're talking cigars, maybe something as advanced as a car, but none of the high-level tech that we're seeing from the U.S. side.
Asher, what do you make of the statement from the Chinese Commerce Ministry saying this is the biggest trade war in history? Some big words.
It certainly are, but certainly expected from the Chinese. I mean, it's hard to say in quantifiable terms if this really is the biggest trade war in history, but what it has is the impossibility to be the most impactful trade war in history. As in previous times where trade was a little bit simpler, one country would trade with another, in today's modern, globalized and interconnected world, it's not simply one country trading with another. Any good that you might buy may have gone through several different countries on its way to reaching you. And those supply lines, those value chains, as the Chinese put it, have the possibility of being interrupted, which could really impact global trade.
Well, speaking of global trade, China, of course, is not the only country that's been targeted with these Trump tariffs. We've seen this kind of tit-for-tat now going on with Canada. We've seen it going on with Europe over the aluminum and steel tariffs. This is a war the U.S. is trying to fight on many fronts. Can it really sustain it?
Look, it's a difficult one to ask because Trump is really throwing the bulk of U.S. purchasing power around in order to try and get better concessions for the U.S. in this trade war. And so far, the U.S. has the capacity to bear it. The U.S. economy is going strong. We saw from the jobs report that was released earlier today, the U.S. economy is really grinning and bearing this, and domestically it's bearing very well. But should all these countries bear down on the U.S. at once and these tariffs continue to increase, as we seem set to see with Trump's rhetoric and rhetoric coming out of China and other U.S. allies, it's going to be very difficult for the U.S. to bear the brunt of the entire world, tariffs and export trades being put directly on them.
Actually, there is an international organization that's supposed to regulate these kind of trade disputes. The World Trade Organization. Has the WTO weighed in on this?
And they certainly have, and they've taken a very bleak view of what is going on here on these tariffs coming in today. Let's take a listen to something that was said just earlier today.
The fallout from these measures is already being felt. Companies are hesitating to invest. Markets are getting jittery. Some prices are rising. With further escalation, the effects would only grow in magnitude, hitting jobs and growth in the countries involved and sending economic shockwaves around the world.
So what we're seeing from the WTO there is a look at the globalized view and a look at the long-term view. It makes sense from their position, something that the Trump administration isn't necessarily looking at. They've looked more at the domestic view, at the shorter-term view, at looking to boost production inside the United States, boost workers inside the United States, and that's something that is those two conflicting worldviews may cause a serious problem in the longer term.
Indeed it may, and we'll have to see how this war being fought really on the trade battleground plays out.